Well, good evening, Grace Church. My name is Tristan, and to everyone from our Humble campus, Tomball campus, Liberty campus, Garden Oaks campus, and here on our online campus, welcome to church tonight. It's going to look a little different tonight. You're going to see that we don't have a worship set, but we do want to let you know that you can worship God through the giving of tithes and offerings at any point in the service tonight by going to grace.one and clicking the Give tab, or you can click the Give button right now in the chat. Now, as we get started into the night, this is the second week of our race and culture discussion in the living room. Now, if you tuned in last week, you saw one of the most powerful discussions we've ever been a part of, led by Pastor Brett and some of the members of our church. And tonight, we're going right back into the discussion on race and culture, this time led by Pastor Scott. So this is what we want you to do. Go ahead and clear any distractions that you may have, put your phone on mute, and pay attention. For the next 45 minutes, listen in. Listen to the questions that are asked, the discussion that is had, and then we want to invite you to join us in having these conversations. Not just in our living room or in your living room, but everywhere that you go. Because we want to be part of the healing and part of the reconciliation that we truly believe our country is going to experience. So tune in with us, stay in tight to this discussion that's going to be had in the living room tonight, and I'll see you again at the end of service.
Hello to the Grace family and to the friends of Grace, everyone who is joining us here in the living room. Now we're at Humble, we're at the broadcast campus, but to everybody at Garden Oaks, Liberty, Tomball, and the members of the Humble campus, we welcome you. And this is going to be a great night. This is going to be a phenomenal conversation we're about to have. Now, this is Father's Day week. And with Father's Day coming up, and by the way, if you're doing in-person worship with us, make sure you're at your campus this Sunday for Father's Day. Or if you're doing online campus with us as we still walk through COVID-19, same thing. Make sure you take some time to join us either at 9 a.m. or 11 a.m. Also, we have the Spanish service that we offer. Be a part of Father's Day at Grace. At Father's Day at Grace, we celebrate men. We don't beat men up. We celebrate men, and we're excited about that. But in the middle of what we're facing as a nation, in the middle of, to me, the greater pandemic, what we have seen with the black lives that have been impacted by abuse of power, what we have seen with the protests and the things that have happened, and with Grace Church being a diverse, multicultural church, and that being one of our core values, we feel like we need to have some conversations in the living room. And we've had last Wednesday, if you call it, Pastor Brett and some phenomenal couples, diverse couples, talking about true challenges, true issues that black families face, that black men face. And then, of course, we had Hispanics represented. And then now, going into Father's Day, we feel like it would be a wise thing to have some fathers and sons talk about what's going on in America. In fact, I think that's one of the challenges we have is people aren't talking. People are yelling. People are posting. People aren't talking. And we've challenged, Pastor Brett and I have challenged, our campus pastors have challenged the members of Grace. One of the greatest steps towards healing is just to sit down and talk to somebody, especially someone different from you. And I haven't done everything right, but I will tell you that after the death of George Floyd, and whenever things were stirring, we had not yet moved into protesting and rioting and all that, but just stirring, I reached out to some men from Grace Church, African-American men, and I felt very unqualified to offer any input or advice, but more or less just to say, how are you? And I will tell you, after talking to over a dozen men, I hung up from those conversations, number one, feeling very good about my church and the people I serve, because I talked to Christ-centered, godly men, hurting, angry. You can be angry and not sin, but solid men, solid citizens, and most especially solid Christians. And it lifted my spirits, but it also made me feel that we need to do something like this right here. So I want to introduce, Spencer and I are here as hosting this, but I want to introduce this phenomenal panel we have of fathers and sons, a couple of grandfathers in the mix, and then we're going to jump right into this discussion. First of all, I want to welcome Robert Turner. He is a member of Grace, been here since 2009. You bring a very unique experience, and he was one of the men that I reached out and talked to. He's a preacher's kid, just like I am, but before his father was a pastor, his father was a policeman. And so he's lived with a blue life, a black man in a uniform, and walked through that. And then also has served on the grand jury 4 different times here in the Houston area, and has seen the justice system, has seen what happens. We were talking earlier, and I'm sure it'll come out anytime there's a police shooting, and just a very unique insight. And I'm excited to hear from Brother Robert. Of course, Spencer, my son, I'm glad he's here with us. Part of our team here at Grace, and then also just a great father and leader. We have Terrence Palmer, and with him, his son, Terrence the second, who we're going to refer to as TP, because there's 3 Terrences on this panel. So we have Terrence Palmer and we have TP. On the back row, matching the Blues Brothers, Ulysses Gorey, a phenomenal member of Grace, and his son, Ulysses Jr. Glad to have the Goreys here. Again, great members of the church. Then we have Thomas and Frank Salazar. Thomas and Frank, I love that we're a multi-generational church. The Salazars are multi-generational here, great leaders, members of the church, a phenomenal businessman, leader in the community. Glad to have them. And then we have Terrence Bean and his son Elijah. Now, Terrence was Spencer's basketball coach back in the day, and he has coached track, basketball, just about everything. He is an athlete and definitely leads and mentors athletes. So since we have 3 Terrences, we're going to call him coach for the day, and very excited to have them. And I got to throw this in because I just found this out. And Elijah is a junior at Summer Creek High School. I'm sorry, now a senior. My bad. As of just a week or so ago, he is now a senior at Summer Creek High School and just committed to Baylor University on a football scholarship. We've got a Baylor Bear in the house today. Elijah, we're proud of you for that. So this is our panel, and all I want to do is read a scripture. Again, interesting, whenever I spoke to fathers, and especially spoke to black fathers, their burden and their concern about the world we're in, but also about that next generation, talking to their sons, their daughters. In fact, this weekend I was at a wedding for Grace Church, and I was sitting next to a young African-American man who's a member of the church, and they confided in us, sitting there at the table, myself and Melanie, they're expecting their very first child. And his words to me were, I was so excited, and then yet the timing of finding out his wife was pregnant was right in the middle of the protest and the black injustice and what's happening here in our nation. And he candidly said, I'm so excited, but honestly, I had a wave of fear of what kind of a world am I going to be bringing this new baby into. That's heavy. That's very, very heavy. And we have a responsibility as fathers. I am convinced that when it comes to things like racism, prejudice, so much of that it's taught. It's passed down. If it's not taught verbally, it's caught. It's picked up. And I just want to set the tone with a scripture. This was God speaking of Abraham, but it's our responsibility as men, especially as fathers. In Genesis 18:19, God spoke of Abraham and he said, I have singled him out so that he will direct his sons and their families to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just. And now God was speaking of Abraham, but listen to what he said. I've singled him out so that he will direct his sons and their families to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just. One thing I know about the group of men that are here with myself and Spencer in the living room, is we feel that call to raise up a generation to do what is right and do what is just. But I guess we should just start by the fact of acknowledging, Houston, we have a problem. We have a real problem. And I know I'm facing it as a pastor of a multicultural church, but as a white father and as a white man, and I am aware, and we have talked about the fact that I can get as close as I can and shoulder the load. I've said before, you can't get understanding until you understand with someone and stand under what it is they're facing. And I think as again, was speaking here with men, we might shed some light on that first and just talk a little bit. What you've experienced, what you're feeling right now, and what you see. We've come through several weeks now, and I think some folks are hoping it'll just kind of fade out. But that's one thing I've heard from the men of grace, especially the black men of grace, is that's one of the things that can make you weary in well-doing, is we tend to fade out and move on, and then until it arises again. Would anybody want to speak to what you see, what you feel, or where we are right now?
I guess for me, and seeing all the events on TV, I was brought up in a home. My mom, raised 9 kids, and my mom didn't teach us color, right? She was a Christian home, but as we got older, she thought teaching us about you will face racism, and in that, when you face that racism, do not look at that person, because it was the way they were brought up, or the way they've caught something. Like you said, they might have been taught, but they might have been caught something. And for me, it helps me not to get upset with that person. And so now I've learned to try to be able to bottle up that anger and to be able to walk away. And I can honestly say, 18, 19, 20 years old, it wasn't easy to do. But as I get older, the gray hairs come about, and you get a little wisdom. And you try to pass that wisdom down to your kids. I mean, my son told me a story the other day. I thank you for serving, but he's in the military, and served in the Navy. And he gave a story to me the other day about somebody that was in boot camp with him. You like to share that story?
Yeah, so there was a guy I was in boot camp with. He had never met a black person there in his life until he met me. And
where was he from?
Wyoming.
Oh, Wyoming. Land, lots of land.
So the only time he's ever seen a black person in his life is on TV. And you know how we're depicted on TV. It's bad. So for the whole time we were there, the whole 2 months, I wouldn't call him a racist, but I'd say very prejudiced. I'm going to go like that. But by the time the end of the boot camp came around, he saw me for my heart instead of my skin color, which is all I wanted in the first place. So, I don't know if you want to finish on that, but
it's good.
It was difficult because it was the first time I'd ever had to go through anything like that. But it was definitely a learning lesson for both of us.
So with that, let me just ask a question. And again, we have 2 Caucasians. We have a Hispanic father and son. We've got African-American men in the room. How many of you have firsthand experienced, so that would be being profiled and straight up racism, prejudice?
Most definitely.
All of you?
I'm from Michigan. So in Michigan, the schools that we went to, they were predominantly black. And so, for my kids, that, they were with their own. When we moved here, I remember moving here, and I lived in a nice neighborhood. And one morning, leaving out of that neighborhood, I get pulled over. police asked me what am I doing in his neighborhood. I'm
In
like,
his neighborhood or
in this neighborhood.
okay.
He was, I guess he
patrolling?
the first thing he says to me though wasn't, let me see your driver's license or you did something illegal. He asked me why was I in this neighborhood? And so I told him I live here. And so later on then he asked for my ID. I hand him my ID, and then he comes back to the car. I asked him, so why did you stop me? He said, oh, you didn't stop, you coast around the corner. Which made me feel really bad, because why couldn't you say that at the beginning to let me know? And so that was I would say a month after we moved here. And so getting back to my kids, they were used to black, schools and everything. So we put them in white, black, a more diverse school. But the problem was, just like Ulysses Jr. said, a lot of them have never been around blacks. And so he was stereotyped instantly. And I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that.
So I went to a homeschool co-op, and they were not accustomed to black people. And I was fine with that. That wasn't a problem for me. I wanted to make friends, just go about my education. But it's when they start making stereotypes about who I am, trying to put this image on me. You know what I'm saying? Trying to, talk a different way, trying to act a different way. And just little stuff like that just got on our nerves. And even my little sister had to deal with stuff like that, with older, white males and all that. And that just never sat right with me, because we didn't do anything wrong. I didn't want to, just little stuff like that was just so disheartening.
And so that's the thing. We want you to know us. We don't want you to just put us in a box. Okay, if you don't know me, talk to me.
Yes.
Let's converse. That's all I want.
I think my perspective was a little different, because I was raised by a grandparent. So my grandmother raised me. She was born in 1917. So she had a old school perspective, and she had saw some things, that was, very relevant for times like today, in terms of why there's anger and why there's, different things that would preempt certain behavior. I also went to an all-black school, so my high school, Cashmere Senior High, I hadn't interacted with or had a white player or person on my team. We had one Hispanic, and everyone else was black. And then when I graduated and I went to school for sports, to college, I went to a predominantly white university. So at the age of 18 was my first experience with, now this diversity or this interaction with white. So I didn't know how to really respond. I believe with sports, which is always a great diversifier, I was able to blend in and meet people, and things were great. I was a little nervous because I had to learn, and people had to learn me, but it was, again, one of those learning processes. It was a thing you had to actively do. You had to actively understand and meet people and learn things. So it was my first, interaction, but also I recognized that there were people that were the opposite of me. They had grew up all white. They had never experienced African American. They come to college, now that diversification is there, and so they're sort of filling out who I am. Some people did it well, some people did not do it well at all. And I think, Pastor Scott, I mentioned the first time something like this really hit me, when I noticed the difference, was we were going about our way one day in college, and everyone kind of met up around the post office between classes. That's near the student union. And that was the day of the OJ verdict. And so I remember, everyone, you heard a buzz, they're about to announce the OJ verdict. They're about to announce this. So a lot of people stepped into this student union, hundreds of people there. And for the first time, I learned something that I call mob psychology. And that's where, as soon as the verdict landed, as soon as they said it, it was like the room was split in half.
Wow.
It was like all of a sudden you were white and I was black. Even fellow teammates that we walked in together, all of a sudden we kind of glanced at each other like it was two different sides. Now I didn't have a stake or a claim in that verdict. I didn't really care, other than OJ was black and some other people. But it was that first moment where people had to decide, hey, am I with this guy or am I with my mob? Am I with my group? Do I identify with white versus black, or is this still the buddy that I walked in with? And that's when I really first started thinking a specific way, and I decided that mob psychology would not be the way that I tried to handle things like that. It's all about individuality. So you really want to try to, obviously you identify with who you identify with, and I'm believer first, and I'm definitely black. So I'm angry and everything else that comes with it, and I'm doing things to try to better the situation. But also it's about individuality. It's about conversations with fellow believers. It's about conversations with other white people. It's about me being a coach, always making sure my teams have diversity, always making sure at a younger age that everybody understands that unity goes beyond color and all those different things. So I do agree with you. I believe our next generations are going to be better, because I hope people are really pouring into diversity and really, blurring the lines of color. But my interaction and my introduction to that was very unique. And one last thing is, because I was raised by a grandmother and I love her very much, she taught me a ton of things, but I had to actively seek out information for myself. And some of the things that she thought or believed or taught based on the information she had, it couldn't come with me into my generation. So some of us have to be willing to challenge what our parents have taught. We have to be willing to research and learn on our own, because if we don't, we may be operating on some bad information, or we may still be, cutting off a part of the hen to put it in the pan, but we no longer have a short pan. We got a long pan, so we don't have to do what our parents did. So I challenge people to challenge and research what they've learned from their parents to make sure it's still relevant.
Okay, Coach, everyone has said some great stuff. You said two things, the mob mentality. To me, that's something that when something hits, an injustice hits like what we've had, or when you get pulled over unjustly wrong, like you were pulled over, or when someone treats you like that at boot camp, and especially the day of the O.J. Simpson verdict, when something like that happens, you realize that it is amazing how we have a default, or we can, if we're not spirit-led, a default that you do revert back to the old man, or the old information. It's interesting what you said there, and maybe we can speak to that. Someone in here, I'm not looking at you just because you have gray hair, Brother Robert, but you had to filter. Now there's a struggle there, because you want to be loyal to your family and your bloodline, but then to say, well, hold on, not everything fits in today's context or today's culture, not everything. You think about what a lady saw born in 1917 and what she went through. And then if that's your lens, because we all look through a lens. We all look through a lens. And that doesn't mean it's correct. If you're wearing a blue lens, everything you see is blue. It doesn't mean it's really blue. And I believe the generation ahead of us put that lens on us. They did. Franklin and Joyce Jones put a lens on me on how we see the world. And everything in that world is not perfect, but one thing we were taught was to respect diversity in all kinds and races. In fact, that's one of the things that's grieved me even here in Humble, stuff I didn't know. Daddy had friends. Daddy had business connections, a partnership. He went into partnership with another man named Jones, Mr. A.W. Jones, who was an African-American man, but he lived in Bordersville. And I didn't know why it was called Bordersville, because we'd go to Bordersville to eat barbecue at his wife's restaurant, Betty's Barbecue. So and the owner, Mr. A.W. and Miss Betty, are sitting at our table talking with the other Joneses. It's just all Joneses. I didn't know it was called Bordersville, because when Humble segregated, that was the border, and the black community had to move there, and that's why it was called Bordersville. But that default and that lens, and that going back to the mob mentality versus who I am in Christ versus what the mob is saying right now. I have wondered, in light of everything, very candidly, in light of everything that's happened, not at Grace, not with members of Grace, but in the public, if I come across an African-American man or whatever, are they mad at me because I'm white? And ironically, everyone I've had connections with, I'm talking about from UPS to anyone, it's just been extremely friendly and cordial and kind. But you wonder if we all go to our default setting. Does that make sense?
And definitely that word, calling it mob is not a negative indicator, because it may not always be negative. It's just, as you mentioned, your default setting or your culture or who you identify with in other scenarios, right? Even the body of believers could be that mob or that group, right? Because it's, if it's a religious versus a non-religious conversation, well, then the lines are drawn. So I just want to emphasize that it may not necessarily be a negative thing, because right now some people are calling people mobs who are protesting. So not to point out anything like that, but just the fact of there are some times where things will point out and you'll have to say there's a line drawn between white or black and Hispanic. I have my brother and my sister, I have 6 black and Hispanic nieces and nephews. So my brother and my sister are married to Hispanic. So if something happened between black and Hispanic communities at some point, if it's a boom, like a George Floyd moment, if it's an explosion, what happens when lines are drawn? Are we still husband and wife, or are we black and Hispanic, right? So those moments do happen.
And most likely what would happen there is they would be one, but they would struggle with their family.
Right.
That's where the struggle would be.
I'd like to share a couple of things which are along the same lines. I am from San Antonio. That's my hometown. So my mind goes back to when I was in junior high school. I went to integrated junior high school, and I guess I was the second group to attend the school. So we went through a lot of the changes that kids would go through. What I noticed that if the older people stayed out of the situations, we got along real good. Okay.
Wow.
Now, I also went to high school, Highland High School in San Antonio. And I remember this day particularly well because it was the day JFK was assassinated. I was at study hall, and it come over the loudspeaker. The principal said, "Just want to inform you, the president has been shot." He was in Dallas, Texas.
Yes.
Half of the study group stood up and applauded. And I was taken back. Why would they applaud because the president had just got shot? Needless to say, they dismissed school. I went home and I had a talk with my dad. Why would some people applaud when the president got shot? By the time I got home, I found out that later on that evening that he passed. And then my dad had a talk with us. My dad was a police officer at that time. We also had to talk about how we deal with police officers. He told us all police officers are not bad. He said, but treat them with respect. They wear the uniform. They have the responsibility to protect us. And so we took that to heart, okay, yes, sir, no, sir. And we sort of took that in. My brother and I and also my sisters were talked to. So in 1965, this is changing a little bit. We moved to Houston. I went to enroll in Jesse H. Jones High School, 11th grade. The lady looked, when I went into the registrar's office, the lady looked through my transcript, looked at my grades. You have good grades. And then she told me, "I'm sorry, but I won't be able to enroll you." I said, "What do you mean you won't be able to enroll me?" She said, "The schools here segregated." And I said, "What?" So then I went back home. I was very angry and told my mom and dad, I said, "Hey, this is just it. Schools are segregated." What I understand, the schools were only integrated up through the 9th grade, I think, in that particular year. So then I had a decision. I could go back to San Antonio, finish school, stay with some of my relatives, finish school, or stay here. I wanted to be with my parents and my siblings. So I said, okay, I'll do whatever necessary. So I went to Jack Yates. I finished from Jack Yates. Also was a student at TSU for a while. But those incidents gave me a glimpse into what Houston was going through at that time. There was a lot of questions about police violence at that time, where young black men were mistreated, pulled over, beaten. So that always stuck in the back of my mind. Now, I had encounters with police officers where I was pulled over for minor traffic violations and stuff. I always respected them. I came out fine. I didn't have any issues, you know. I didn't try to fight with them, anything like that. But I had friends to where the outcome was different. But I don't know what their mom or dad told them at that time. My dad always told me to, you know, stand up for myself, but also to respect people that were in positions of authority. And that's what I tried to do. My dad always told me, when you talk to a man, you look him in his eyes and you talk to him. And you talk to him in a way that, you know, is respectful. If he curses you or talks down to you, you tell him, hey, you don't have to talk to me like that. So I've carried that with me, you know, all my teen and my adult life. That's just the way I am. I look a person in the eye, and I'm able to communicate with them without using profanity. But sometimes you have those people that want to push your button. They just don't want to quit. They want to push you over the edge. And what I'd like to say to young people, especially young black men today, is when a police officer pulls you over and he talk to you, respect him. Telling him yes, sir, no, sir. I mean, you know, you're not lowering yourself. You're just giving them a respect that the uniform is due, even though the person in the uniform might be screwed up, okay? Handle it in a way that you get a chance to go back to your family, okay?
It's good, but Brother Robert, but you know, sometimes you can do those steps.
Yep.
And what we're going through today is really real. I was going to not say it, but I'm going to say it. 20 years ago, I was at a church function. And I was at a church function. My previous pastor, we gave him a graduation party. And we were leaving a church function. Actually, I hired the police officers, and I put on all of the event, and leaving out of Dewson Park. Dewson Park had this great idea to have the one way into the park. And, you know, and I was leaving the park. I was going out, and he pulled me over, and I said, what's wrong, officer? Yes, sir, no, sir. All of that. I with my wife and my kids, and all of them in the car. And basically, long story short, they still had the double yellow lines in the road. And I told the police officer, okay, that's no problem. So he wrote the ticket, gave me the ticket. And I said, well, I'm not guilty. I'm not going to sign. I'll just see you in court. Well, lo and behold, if you don't sign a ticket, that means you're not going to show up for court. He said, you're going to jail. I said, for what, sir? He said, because you didn't sign it. I said, I'll sign it right now. And then he said a whole bunch of other cuss words. He opened the door, took me in, put the handcuffs. My wife, you know my wife. My wife was, she wouldn't hurt a fly. And he grabbed her, threw her against the car. While she was pregnant with John. And took me to jail for minor traffic violation. And I mean, I was torn. So when I see stuff like this on TV, I can identify with it. And I tell my sons today, and you know, he can probably tell you, yes sir, no sir, and then we can deal with it later. But there are some black injustices that's out there, and we must identify it and help and have the public and the police officer to sit and just talk to our young men and get rid of the bad apples that's there. I mean, it's on a small few. Yes. Right? I mean, my uncle was a police officer. My cousin was a police officer, and friends that are police officers. So I don't have a disdain for police officers, but there are some bad apples out there.
Yes.
And we just need the public, we need the police chief, we need the fellow officers to help us get rid of those, so we as a community, with the police as well as the community, can work together. But my mind is not blinded by that one incident. That filter we talked about, it's not blinded by that one incident, but it does happen.
So yeah, and the unique thing for you to say that, and it's interesting, that word "bad apples," that's a buzzword right now that you know, you're hearing a lot, and that is true. I'm gonna tell you, I've had some folks that I've disappointed at church that I didn't mean to, because I know how many law enforcement officers we have at Grace Church. They worship. Now, they don't come in their uniform because they're at church, but they're not bad apples. And regretfully, they're being lumped in. You know, we're back to prejudging, profiling, putting them there. On the flip side, this is a real issue. This man, he'll hurt a bass guitar. Other than that, he won't hurt anything. And to be pulled over in the morning time in his own neighborhood like that. And my problem, my issue and challenge is every black man I speak to, you know, you and I talked, and I didn't know that story. So what I was going to say, and I didn't know about what you experienced when you went to high school. So some of you are holding out on me a little bit because
we can't give you everything.
Well, because what I've experienced has been either it has happened, or if not directly to that person, just 1 degree removed, like my son or my son. So I have not talked to an African American man who has not been impacted either directly or closely. And I didn't know your story when we met, and I didn't know yours because, again, y'all holding out. And Brother Robert, you and I talked. You didn't tell me about what happened when you moved to Houston, but it is real. And that I do believe, and you mentioned this, that there's got to be something. I've had a member of Grace, a lady, African American lady, who's in law enforcement, who confided in me a couple of years ago. I will not leave the station in my uniform when I'm off work. I'm so afraid that if I'm going home from work, I change and put on street clothes. Now that ought not be. On the flip side, you ought not be afraid, ought not. I'm speaking like the previous generation. You should not be afraid. You shouldn't be worried about TP driving down the road, or Ulysses, or John, any of your children, about Elijah being out, going to Baylor, or just living life. That, you know, I've gave my son, I was thinking even today, getting ready for this, you know, he's done a cross country, drove from here to Memphis and back. He's driven from here to Birmingham and back as he was interning. And of course, I walked through road safety and how you handle a police officer, a talk a father would give, but I recognize it stops at a point where I have not had that fear of saying, and if they see your blonde hair, you be ready, because they may suspect you of, you know, and that is a part where, as we shared this past weekend, sit where someone else has sat and try to appreciate and understand that. So here's a question, and Coach, I want to lean on you because something you said to me in conversation. When that happens, when this happened to you, Terrence, when this happened to you, Ulysses, when that happened to you at boot camp, Ulysses Jr., when in TP at school, and what you've experienced, that your reaction, because that's the old saying, the only person I can control is me. And if someone's going to treat me disrespectful or do that, how do I react and whatever? And Coach, you used an athletic expression which resonated with a very, very former athlete. Elijah, you want to say something?
Yeah,
go ahead.
Because I grew up around sports too. So I grew up playing with kids on the same team. I was white and Mexican. So I grew up like we all diverse. We all one color. So I didn't really get to like stereotypes and stuff till high school. So it was never really with just kids, because when we got to high school, I'm passing the ball to white kids, I'm passing the ball to Mexicans, they're making sure they're passing the ball to me. So to me, we on a team. We call it a team of family. So we all the team. We all a family. So I got a family members of different colors. So when we in class, we all going to different groups. But he with his group, and he really hang out with kids of the same color. But I look at him as a family member, because we all on the same team, really. So when we really see like something happens and it's like stereotype, it really like shakes like how you feel about that person. So you really just got to sit down and talk with them. Cause I got a person on my team that's like a different color than me, and when this all happened, we had to like sit down and talk. He had like talked to me. He was like how you feeling about the whole situation? I was like, he had like checked on me. We had talked about it, because like at the end of the day, we may be like different colors. He may hang out with his friends that's different. That's a different race. I may hang out with my friends that's a different race. But at the same day, we're different. We're a family. So you just gotta think about it like that.
Very good.
Yeah, I think about where you were going. I also thought about this when Brother Ulysses was talking as well. And I think when you and I were talking, I used the phrase like, I want my godliness to be my reflex. I want
Wow.
God to be my reflex, because someone was alluding to anger and different things. And most people that may know me, that have experienced me, they may see me as mild-mannered. They may see me as Coach, and some of my parents even say I'm too soft. But there is a side from where I've grown up that can be sparked. There is an anger that's generational. There's an anger that's cultural, because I grew up in a certain way in a certain part of town with certain rules and certain things that I saw. So I've been a believer a lot shorter period than I've been who else I was before that culturally. So one of my older pastors used to say, just because I don't do the things I used to do don't mean I forgot how to do them. So
Come on.
some of us can respond in anger. Some of us can act out when that boom moment happens, when that explosion happens. How do I respond? And sometimes what I'm describing, sometimes I often fail at this, especially within my four walls. And I'm just being perfectly honest. It's one of those where when something happens, can I take a deep breath? Can I reflect very quickly and allow my godliness to go before me? Can I tap into a scripture? Can I tap into a thought? Can I really remind myself very quickly who I am in Christ before I respond? And sometimes we don't. Sometimes we may miss that. So my prayer for myself, my ongoing prayer, is that my godliness be my reflex. That my godliness happens. When I talk to my sons a lot, and Elijah could tell you, also my son Isaiah, I've talked to them about. Everyone knows about lifting weights and being prepared. Like, you can't go out on the field skinny. You got to get in the weight room. If you're going to play North Shore, if you're going to play Atascocita, if you're going to play whoever, you look at the kids are physically strong. And you're in the weight room, you're pushing against resistance, you're working your body out so that you're physically strong. And so I challenge my sons and my athletes, what about your spirit man?
Yes.
Is your spirit man skinny and weak? Is he frail? If you put your spirit man on the field, on the court right now, would he get trampled or would he be strong? So you have to lift on the word. You have to exercise your brain. You have to exercise your spirit. And some of us, have a strong physical body, but our spirit man and our knowledge man is weak. So a lot of things what I've been doing honestly is I've been trying to learn more about my own history. I've been trying to learn about why do people see us this way, and I'm looking at Birth of a Nation, or I'm looking at other things. I'm looking at this, things that have impacted, and I'm understanding myself and the situation, but I'm also understanding what have other people viewed that has them looking upon us a certain way, right? And so those things are important. And again, that all goes back to just having that conversation. But I challenge everyone here, and I always challenge myself, because, Pastor, it's not something that I get right every time, but I continue to ask that God go before me, that God be my reflex in certain situations so that I can respond properly.
Coach, that is the, do y'all mind if we do another Wednesday? Because we have flown through a Wednesday here. So we're going to go, we're going to do another Wednesday if I'm allowed. But what you just said, when you said reflex, the phrase that comes to my mind is muscle memory. When you've trained and trained and trained, your first reflex is what you've trained to do. And I think let's go back to what we talked about, the default. I think that's sometimes what we see. When something happens, what you see is the muscle memory, the reflex, whether I go back to, again, you can be angry and not sin, whether my default reaction is Christ first, or if it's just an angry person, or I don't even want to give much time to it because it's such a heinous thing for a father and son in Georgia, for their reflex when they see a black man jogging, their reflex is to start the truck. And where did they have the gun so readily available? Obviously they were sitting out. The shotgun and the handgun was out. For their first reflex to be, and again, we're talking, this is Father's Day week. As a father, for me to tell Spencer, you drive, I'm getting in the back of the truck. And we're going to drive and run a man down. That reflex, whatever happened to, if you suspect 911 or whatever, but we really show in a pinch who we are, what comes out of us. And I needed to hear that, because my reflex needs to be Christ first.
And one of the toughest things to do is to retrain a muscle memory. So when you're training someone, if they've been doing something a certain way and you're trying to retrain them, that's really tough to replace an old muscle memory with a new. So someone who's been thinking a certain way for a long time, sometimes it's a little struggle. And as long as a person is willing, as long as an athlete is willing to try that new way, it feels bad at first. But if they trust in you, they're going to come out much better on the other end. So to some of my white brothers and sisters, or anyone else who's kind of really, really launching into this for the first time, it's going to feel real awkward to retrain your muscle memory to think a different way.
Yes.
But the first step is, am I willing to do it? Because it's going to feel a little awkward. It's going to feel a little bad, Coach, when you first start out. Yeah. But once you retrain and once you get that golf swing going the right way, once you get that baseball swing or your jump shot, whatever it is, once you get it moving the right way with this new muscle memory, now you can open up so many more doors for you to do bigger and better things.
I think that's the reason why, because it's so true in my golf lessons that I paid for. in any lesson, even hunting with a guide, I've always been told I'd rather have someone who's not learned. I'd rather have a hunter who's never hunted than to have someone who thinks they know how, because you're going to go to your old habit. And it's interesting that that's why we're told we must be born again, because otherwise the old habits will be our first. We're going to go back to the old habit, and I've the sports really, that resonates with me. It will go back to that old, instead of, if any person's in Christ, they are a new creation. Old things have passed away; all things have become new. Okay, this is a great night in the living room with some amazing men, and we've not even heard from everybody. So I'm just going to say I don't think men get celebrated enough, and I feel confident saying that because there's no ladies in the living room. Y'all feel good about it since it's just us? Yeah. So because of that, we'll take the Wednesday after Father's Day, and we'll go a little farther, and we'll talk more man stuff, actually kingdom stuff, and let's talk more about race and culture. We love you. Thank you for joining us in the living room. And as we say every weekend at Grace, we want to say to you, may the Lord bless you and protect you. May the Lord smile upon you and be gracious to you. And may the Lord show you His favor and give you His peace. Until we see you again, whether in person or online, don't forget, Christ victorious. God bless.
Man, that was a fantastic discussion tonight with Pastor Scott and all these groups of fathers and sons coming together to have these real conversations about race and culture here in the living room. And at the very end of the night, you heard Pastor Scott and some of the members on stage kind of discussing muscle memory and what that means in terms of having to retrain things that you've been doing for so long. But Pastor Scott also alluded to something else at the end. He talked about being born again. So you can go through the process of trying to retrain yourself to do new things, or you can do what the Bible says and be born again by committing your life to Jesus Christ. And so right now, to everyone who's watching, we want to give you that opportunity to accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior and to be born again. In the chat below, you'll see a little button that's going to pop up that says, I want to raise my hand. I want to commit my life to Jesus. Simply click that button, fill out just a little bit of information, and a member of our team is going to get in touch with you to help give you your next steps as you begin this journey on your walk with Jesus Christ. You know, talking about all these fathers and sons that we had on stage tonight, this upcoming weekend is Father's Day weekend. Whether you're attending a live campus at Humble, Tomball, Garden Oaks, or Liberty, or whether you're going to tune back in with us here at our online campus, we can't wait to see you soon. Like Pastor Scott said, Christ victorious. We love you, Grace Church.